Hello there, and welcome back to the Wise Practice Podcast. I'm Amy Dover, licensed marriage and family therapist, owner of Dover Counseling Services in Southeastern Alabama, and Wise Practice consultant. Thank you again for spending time with me today. So, I want to start today's episode with a question. Whether you're a solo or group owner, if you could go back to the very beginning of your practice, the day you opened your doors, or the day you made the decision to hire your first therapist, and you could hand your past self one piece of paper with one thing written on it, just one, what would it say? I've thought about this quite a bit, and particularly because of this podcast, what would I do differently if I were starting a group practice today? And 11 years of building of my own practice, of 11 years of making mistakes and learning from them, of watching God show up in the gaps and watching myself get in my own way. And when I boil it all down to one piece of paper and what I would tell my past self, it's three words: find your people. That's it. That is the thing I would tell myself. And today I want to unpack that, along with everything else that I would do differently if I were starting a group practice today, because I've made mistakes in every category there is: money, people, leadership, faith. And I believe with everything in me that you don't have to make all of those same mistakes. And that's what this episode is for. Let me tell you what my support system looked like when I opened Dover Counseling in 2015. I had a couple of mentors, good people, genuinely supportive therapists. One of them was a practice owner himself. The other was being promoted through the ranks of a large mental health corporation out of state, but wonderful supportive mentors. I have a husband who understands the insurance world in ways that most spouses of practice owners don't understand. And that was a genuine gift. And I had people in my life who loved me and cheered me on, very encouraging, very much like, Amy, everything you've done has brought you to this place. This is exactly where God wants you to be. Very encouraging, right? What I did not have was other faith-based practice owners who truly got it. So the specific combination of clinical complexity and business responsibility and kingdom calling that defines what we do. People who understood why I just couldn't make the most financially optimal decision and move on. People who had sat in the same chair, made the same mistakes, wrestled with the same questions, and who could look me in the eye and say, yes, I know exactly what you mean, and here's what I've learned. And I didn't find that community until 2023, 8 years in, after building through multiple hires and moves, building during a pandemic, after navigating a major culture crisis in my practice, after becoming a seven-figure practice, and after making most of my biggest mistakes alone in the dark, figuring it out through trial and error when I did not have to. When I finally found my people, in a consulting relationship, in an accountability group with other practice owners at my stage, at a conference full of other Christian business owners asking the same questions I've been asking for years, which, by the way, was the Wise Practice Summit. The relief was almost physical. I didn't have to explain myself before making the point. I didn't have to translate my world for someone who had never been in it. I was just understood immediately. And I thought, why did I wait so long? What would the last 8 years have looked like if I had found this place sooner? So when I say find your people, I mean, don't build alone if you don't have to. Find the community of practice owners who share your faith, understand your work, and are a few steps ahead of you on the road. Because almost everything else I'm going to talk about in this episode, the money mistakes, the people mistakes, the leadership struggles, all of it is easier to navigate when you're not navigating it alone. Okay, so first, money. Did you just kind of squirm in your seat a little bit when I said that word? Money. Let's talk about it. I made a lot of mistakes here, and I think a lot of Christian practice owners make the same ones. The most visible mistake was my compensation model. And in previous episodes, I've talked about this. I'm very open about the mistakes that I made because I want other practice owners to understand how important this is and really to learn, like, don't do what I did back then. Like, do this instead. This is the steps we take for a good, solid, sustainable compensation model. But my most visible mistake with money was my compensation model. I started with a 1099 structure and a 70-30 split, meaning my therapist kept 70 cents of every dollar that came into the practice, which sounds very generous, and it was unsustainably so. I was absorbing every overhead cost, every liability, every administrative burden, and giving away 70% of the revenue. The math was never going to work long term, but I didn't know that because I was doing what I saw other practice owners doing. And as I said before, a lot of them didn't know what they were doing either. We were all just copying each other and hoping for the best. But it wasn't long, before that 70-30 split. Again, I had so much wrong with my money stuff in the very beginning, the 70-30 split. And then I was even giving them bonuses. Like, oh my gosh, even just thinking about it now, I'm like, what were you thinking, Amy? But it was my generosity. Just, I really, really wanted my team to know how much I valued them, but I was doing it all wrong. Underneath the compensation structure mistake was actually something deeper that no spreadsheet could fix or really reveal. Because what was underneath my compensation mistake was my scarcity mindset. So I had operated for years from a place of financial fear. A lot of it comes from my family of origin, just my own baggage around money, afraid that there wouldn't be enough, afraid that if I paid myself well, something would go wrong, afraid that wanting the practice to be profitable somehow contradicted my calling, somehow it just wasn't godly or Christian. And that fear drove decisions that were not good for me or the practice. God had to do some real work on me in this area. And I want to be very clear. It wasn't just mindset work, it was spiritual work. It was me coming to actually believe, not just intellectually acknowledge, but to believe and know that He and He alone is my provider, that the practice is His before it is mine, that He is not surprised by a slow month or a difficult season, that I do not have to white knuckle my way through financial uncertainty because I'm actually not in charge of the outcome. And here's the piece I really want to say out loud because I don't think it gets said enough in Christian spaces. Profit can honor God. Yes, let me say that one more time. Profit can honor God. When it is pursued with integrity, when it is used thoughtfully, when it is the result of serving people well and stewarding resources wisely, profit is not a dirty word. It can do great things. It is not the opposite of calling. It is what makes the calling sustainable. You cannot keep your doors open, keep your staff employed, keep serving your community if the practice is not financially healthy. Sustainability is stewardship, and stewardship honors God. And I will go toe to toe with any practice owner who disagrees with that. I firmly believe in how practice and how profit can honor God, particularly when you understand this all belongs to Him anyway. So if I were starting over today, I would do the work on my money mindset first, actually. Before I wrote a compensation structure, before I hired anyone, before I made a single financial decision, I would get clear on what I believe about money, about provision, about profit, and about my role as a steward of something that belongs to God. Because every financial decision I made from a place of scarcity cost me more than the ones I made from a place of trust. Of course. Okay, let's talk about people. This is the category where I have the most material, actually. And I say that with humility and some humor because I think most practice owners do. We are relational. We love people. We know that God brings people into our paths for purpose. We see our practices as places that we can serve others, but serve our team. But man, I've made some mistakes in this area, and I'm not afraid to talk about them because, again, I want you to learn from me. So, my early hires were actually pretty good. Imperfect, of course. I've talked in other episodes about not having contracts and learning the hard way about expectations and leadership. But the people themselves were good, solid therapists, and several of them are still with me 11 years in, which is amazing. Such a blessing. The harder lessons came later as the practice grew and became more visible and more successful. And this is something I really want you to hear. Here's something that nobody warned you about. Success attracts attention, and not all of it is healthy attention. As Dover Counseling grew, as we became known in the community, as therapists in the area saw what we were building, we started attracting people who wanted to be part of something successful. And some of those people were wonderful. Some actually joined the team. And some of them were not what they appeared to be in an interview. And I did not always catch it fast enough before I allowed them on the team. So I learned that you have to hire very carefully for values and culture fit, not just clinical competence, not just likability, not just need. Someone can be a genuinely good therapist and still be wrong for your practice. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's the truth. Someone can interview beautifully and still carry things that will eventually affect your culture in a negative way. And the square peg in the round hole situation that I talked about in the last episode, where something feels off, but you talk yourself into it anyway because you want to give them a chance, or because they need the opportunity, or because you believe in their potential, or because you're just desperate to hire, that almost never ends well. I've lived that more than once, I'm embarrassed to say, but I'm just putting it out there. But here's the pattern that I made most consistently across all of it. The one that shows up underneath, this is the one pattern that shows up underneath every people mistake that I've just about made. People pleasing over practice needs. Choosing to avoid a hard conversation because I didn't want someone to be upset with me. Letting something go on longer than it should have because I didn't want to be the bad guy. Overcompensating financially because I wanted people to feel valued, even though it was unsustainable. Making decisions based on what would keep the peace instead of what the practice actually needed. I'm very happy to say that I'm in a place now where there's not much that trumps practice needs. I very much am like, okay, well, I like this person, or I understand what you're asking for, but this does not align with practice needs. And at the end of the day, it is about the practice needs. I'm very much more confident in saying that now. And there's always, I understand the importance of data, which we're going to talk about, in making those decisions. But a lot of us are people pleasers at our core, and really understanding if that's your pattern, making sure that you recognize it, and really just making sure that you're not making your decisions from a place of people pleasing. It is not sustainable, and it really isn't authentic or taking good care of your practice. So I'm a relational person. I love my team deeply. And for a long time, I confused loving my team with keeping them comfortable. And those are not the same thing. Loving your team means being honest with them, holding them to a standard, having the hard conversations early instead of late, and making decisions that protect the mission, even when it costs you something relationally. And for us, that is so hard to do, but vital for the sustainability of our practices. So if I were starting over today, I would get much clearer, much earlier on what I actually need from a hire, not just clinically, but values wise, culture wise, character wise. And I would recognize earlier and trust the Holy Spirit's nudging more. The slow creeping feeling that something isn't right is almost always right. Don't wait until you have a crisis to act on it. All right, so this might be the hardest category to talk about because it's the most internal, because it's about me, really me. The money mistakes and the people mistakes, those have visible consequences that eventually force you to reckon with them. They're going to catch up with you. The mistakes I made about myself were quieter and slower, and in some ways more costly because they shaped everything from the inside. The biggest one was this: I could not wrap my mind around my own importance in the practice. Does that sound crazy? But I really struggled with that. I mean that very specifically. I kept trying to stay in the clinical role, to be a full-time therapist who also happened to run a growing practice, when what the practice actually needed was an owner who was willing to step back from the clinical work and step into the leadership work, working on the practice, not just in it. And I resisted that for a long time, like several years, actually. And there were many reasons for that, partly because being a therapist was my identity for years. It's just what I had always done. Partly because I genuinely loved the clinical work and I didn't want to give it up. And partly, if I'm being very honest, because staying busy in the therapy room felt safer than sitting in the uncertainty of what it meant to be a CEO. At least when I was seeing clients, I knew I was doing something useful. The leadership work is slower, less tangible, much harder to measure, and oftentimes it's invisible to the people around you. And I struggled with that. But the practice was communicating very clearly through its growth, through its needs, through its problems, that it needed me in a different role. And the longer I delayed that transition, the more the practice paid the price for it. The other thing I got deeply wrong about myself was my relationship with busyness. And some of you might be hearing me on that. And again, this is part of my family of origin. I've had to do a lot of work on this, and I'm just a doer. But I did not realize what my relationship with busyness was. It was a very unhealthy relationship, and I wore it like a badge of honor for years. A full calendar meant I was working hard. It meant I was doing my job. It meant I was earning my place. And for a practice owner, that is exactly backwards. The owner who never has a moment to think is the owner who is always reacting instead of leading. You cannot have vision when your calendar has no margin. You cannot hear from God when you never stop moving. What I know now is that white space on my calendar is not laziness. It is a leadership practice. Stillness is not wasted time. It is how I stay connected to the one who actually knows where this practice is going. The reflective time, the prayer time, the quiet time where I'm not producing anything, that is some of the most important work I do as an owner. And it took me far too long to protect it. And I still do struggle at times to protect it. But thankfully, I have other Christian practice owners in my life who hold me accountable to that. So if I were starting over again today, I would build margin into my schedule from day one. Even as a solo, I would build margin into my schedule and I would make peace with my role as an owner and leader much earlier. And I would stop equating busyness with faithfulness because they are not the same thing. All right, I want to close with the thing that really, I think, underlies everything I've talked about today. Because I could give you a better compensation model and a smarter hiring process and a healthier leadership mindset. All of them would help. All of them things that I have done myself and that are just an ongoing, I always say it's an ongoing objective on my treatment plan. These things. All of that would be great for you to hear and for me to give you. But the deepest thing that I would change if I were starting over is this. I would learn sooner to get out of God's way. I am a striver by nature. I'm a doer. I take risks, sometimes more risks than I should take. Maybe I'm not as risk averse as I should be, but I take risks. I make things happen. I identify a problem and I fix it. Those are not bad qualities in a practice owner. In many ways, they're exactly what this work requires. But they become a problem when they lead you to believe that the practice rises or falls on the strength of your own effort. When striving tips over into control, when doing becomes a way of managing your anxiety instead of actually trusting God, that's a problem. And I did that for years. I spent so much of my practice growth striving, stressing, running on my own energy, solving problems in my own strength, white knuckling my way through hard seasons when I didn't have to. Jesus was right there. He's been there the whole time, and he will continue to be there the whole time. He doesn't need me to do anything for him. What he asks is something both simpler and harder than that, to be his vessel, to be available, to do the work he places in front of me with faithfulness and integrity, and then to trust him with the outcome, to acknowledge that this practice, its growth, its impact, its future belongs to him before it belongs to me. I still struggle with this. I want to be honest about that because I think there's a version of this conversation that sounds like I've arrived somewhere and I haven't. Owners are doers and old habits run deep, but I'm slowly learning and genuinely learning. Like I said, this is an ongoing objective on my treatment plan. A few months ago, I want to tell you the story. A few months ago, I was running some errands, turning into the local Walmart parking lot, actually. And my mind was flooded the way that it gets sometimes with everything on my plate. The new newsletter we were rolling out, a staff issue I needed to address, notes that still needed to be completed, clients I needed to transition, the to-do list just piling up, one thing after another in my mind, and that familiar feeling of being responsible for all of it, carrying all of it, holding it all together through sheer force of will. And then, just as suddenly, a calm settled over me, and a voice, quiet and clear and so tender, said, "Amy, I'm in all of that. You don't have to do it in your own power." I sat in that parking lot for a minute and just let that land. Even now, it makes me a little emotional. He's in the newsletter. He's in the staff issue. He's in the notes and the transitions and the to-do list that never quite gets done. He is in all of it. And I don't have to carry it like it depends entirely on me, because it doesn't. And that day in that Walmart parking lot, I felt such relief and thankfulness to him. So I think that is actually what I would tell my 2015 self. Not just find your people, though that too for sure, but this: he's in all of it. You don't have to do it in your own power. Stop striving and start surrendering. Not passivity, faithfulness. Show up, do the work, and then release the outcome to the one who is never surprised by any of it. That's the practice owner I'm still becoming. And I think it might be the most important work that any of us do. Before I let you go today, I want to tell you about something that I built specifically because of everything I just shared with you. So in July, I'm launching a mastermind group called Built to Last, growing from a solo practice to a group. And the name is intentional. Built to last, not built to hustle, not built to sprint, not built on a foundation of striving and stress and figuring it out alone. Built to last, sustainably, faithfully, with the right people around you. Everything I've talked about in this episode, the money mindset work, the people and hiring clarity, the CEO identity shift, the invitation to stop striving and start trusting, that is the work we are going to do together inside Built to Last, along with the practical stuff: systems, financials, marketing, compensation strategies, interviewing, onboarding, and how to begin making this shift from clinician to CEO in a way that actually sticks. So this class, this group, it starts July 9th and it runs for 6 months. We meet live every other week, and the room is going to be full of Christian practice owners who share your faith, understand your world, and are committed to building something that lasts beyond them. Legacy. People you don't have to explain yourself to, people who get it. The thing I needed most when I opened my practice in 2015 was not a better compensation model, though that would have really helped. It was not a smarter hiring process, though I desperately needed one. It was people, my people. A room full of faith-driven people, practice owners who are asking the same questions and willing to figure it out together. That is what Built to Last is. There's an early bird discount, as well as a discount if you're already part of the Wise Practice community. The deals are great, and if you're a Wise Practice member and register before the early bird date of June 18th, you get $150 off per month of the mastermind. Check out the details at wisepracticeconsulting.com/masterminds, and the link is in the show notes for you as well. I want to tell you thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope something in this episode gave you permission to find your people, to do the money mindset work, to step into the leader you're called to be, and to release the outcome to the one who has always been in all of it. He's in yours too. You don't have to do it in your own power. I'll see you next time, friend.